Good evening, dear listeners. Welcome to this tranquil space, where we invite you to unwind, relax, and drift into a peaceful slumber. Tonight, we will embark on a soothing journey through the pages of history, exploring a topic that may seem, at first glance, quite mundane: the history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. As you settle into your cozy surroundings, allow the gentle cadence of my voice to wash over you like a soft breeze, easing the tensions of the day. The world outside may be bustling with activity, but here, we will create a sanctuary of calm, where the echoes of the past can lull you into a deep and restorative sleep. Our exploration will begin in the heart of the medieval period, a time when communities were woven together by the threads of trade and craftsmanship. Guilds were the lifeblood of these communities, providing structure and support for skilled artisans and merchants. We will meander through the history of how individuals sought to join these esteemed groups, delving into the application procedures that governed their entry. You may find it fascinating to learn about the meticulous documentation required, as well as the various compliance measures that ensured each guild maintained its standards. As we delve deeper, we will uncover the significance of these processes, not just as bureaucratic necessities, but as reflections of the values and aspirations of the people who lived during that time. You will hear about the different types of guilds, from those dedicated to the fine arts to those focused on trade and commerce, each with its own unique set of requirements and expectations. We will also take a moment to reflect on the individuals who navigated these labyrinthine procedures, often filled with anticipation and a touch of anxiety, hoping to secure their place within the guild and, by extension, their role in the community. Their stories, though they may seem distant and long forgotten, resonate with the universal human experience of seeking belonging and purpose. As we traverse this historical landscape, I encourage you to let your thoughts drift like clouds across a clear blue sky. Allow the rhythm of the narrative to soothe your mind, freeing you from the stresses of the present. There is no rush here. We will take our time, savoring each detail, each moment, as we journey through the past. By the time we reach the conclusion of our exploration, you may find yourself wrapped in the warmth of this historical narrative, feeling a gentle pull towards relaxation and restfulness. The calmness of our discussion will be your companion, guiding you softly into the realm of dreams. So, dear listeners, as we prepare to step into this fascinating yet tranquil world of guilds and their application processes, I invite you to take a deep breath. Inhale slowly, filling your lungs with peace, and exhale any lingering tension. Let the weight of the day melt away, and allow yourself to be enveloped in the soothing embrace of history. Now, let us begin our journey into the monotonous yet intriguing history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. Close your eyes, if you wish, and let the gentle flow of this tale carry you away into a serene slumber. Here we go. The history of guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation during the medieval period presents a narrative steeped in tedium and bureaucratic monotony. The earliest historical records concerning guild structures can be traced back to the late 11th century in Western Europe, particularly in the burgeoning urban centers of Flanders, such as Ghent and Bruges. Here, the emergence of trade guilds became a defining characteristic of urban economic life, with the earliest guild charter, the Privileges of Ghent, granted in 1128 by Count Charles the Good. This document set forth the initial framework for guild operations, including membership criteria and application procedures. The architectural context of guilds was equally unremarkable, primarily characterized by the establishment of guild halls. These functional structures, often constructed of timber and local stone, represented the physical embodiment of the guild's administrative and social functions. The Guild Hall of the Weavers in Ghent, for instance, was built in the late 14th century, featuring a simple facade, minimal ornamentation, and a central assembly room where guild meetings and routine administrative functions took place. Such buildings served not only as venues for social gatherings but also as repositories for essential documentation pertaining to membership compliance. The procedures for guild membership application were standardized over time, albeit in a manner that can only be described as laborious and procedural. The application process typically began with a potential member, often referred to as an apprentice, submitting a formal application to the guild's leadership, which was composed of elder members known as masters. This application was to be presented at a designated meeting, often held on the first Monday of each month, a bureaucratic cadence that provided little variance throughout the year. The application itself required the submission of various documents, including proof of apprenticeship completion, typically a certificate issued by the apprentice's master, confirming the individual's training period, which usually lasted between 3 to 7 years. This certificate would then need to be accompanied by a series of attestations from 2 current guild members vouching for the applicant's character and skills. The documentation process was meticulously detailed. Each attestation needed to be signed in ink, with the signatures often requiring an accompanying seal to confirm authenticity. Once the application was submitted, it would be inscribed into the guild's Book of Members, a ledger that detailed all current members, their trades, and their compliance with guild regulations. The administrative procedures surrounding this documentation were often tedious, involving the clerk of the guild, often referred to as the scrivener, who would carefully record each new entry in a clear, legible hand. The scrivener's duties were both essential and monotonous, as they involved not only the recording of new applications but also the updating of existing records to reflect any changes in status or compliance issues. In addition to the application process, prospective members were often required to pay a fee, known as the entrance fee, which varied widely depending on the guild and the complexity of the trade. This fee was typically determined during a meeting of the guild's elder members, where discussions could extend for hours over the appropriate amount, reflecting both the economic conditions of the city and the perceived value of membership. Daily routines within guilds were structured around these application procedures, with specific days allocated for reviewing applications and conducting interviews. An applicant's presence during the review process was often obligatory, and they were required to demonstrate their proficiency in their trade through practical examinations. Such examinations were often mundane, testing basic skills rather than advanced techniques, thus ensuring that the applicant could meet the minimum standards set by the guild. The guild's assembly meetings, typically held in the early evening, were attended by all members, where matters of compliance and application review took precedence. The atmosphere was often one of hushed reverence, punctuated only by the occasional rustle of parchment as decisions were made regarding the. In contrast, stone construction began to gain popularity towards the late 13th century, particularly in urban centers where guilds sought to establish a more permanent and imposing presence. The transition to stone was marked by the construction of the Hall of the Weavers in Ghent, Belgium, completed in 1305. This impressive structure showcased the wealth of the weaving guild, featuring ornate stone carvings and large arched windows that allowed natural light to flood the interior. The use of local sandstone not only highlighted the guild's connection to the region but also demonstrated the guild's commitment to high craftsmanship. The architectural regulations governing guild buildings were often codified in local laws, which specified the dimensions and design elements that were acceptable. For example, the Statutes of the Guild of Butchers in London, written in 1382, mandated that all guild halls must have a minimum height of 20 feet and include a central meeting area that could accommodate at least 50 members. These regulations aimed to ensure uniformity and reflect the guild's status within the city. The influence of these statutes extended beyond mere aesthetics. They also served to reinforce social hierarchies within the guild and the broader community. In addition to the architectural constraints, the interior design of guild halls followed a standardized approach. The layout typically included a central hall for meetings, flanked by smaller rooms for apprentices and storage. Decorative elements were often limited to the guild's insignia and a few symbolic motifs, such as tools of the trade or patron saints. For example, the Guild of Blacksmiths in Nuremberg, established in 1350, adorned their hall with ironwork motifs that represented their craft, but the overall decor remained relatively austere. Historical context further emphasizes the significance of these patterns. During the late Middle Ages, the rise of urbanization and commerce led to increased competition among guilds. As a result, many guilds invested in grander buildings to assert their dominance. The construction of the Hall of the Bakers Guild in Florence in 1422 exemplifies this trend. Featuring a bold facade and elaborate frescoes, it was designed to impress both members and outsiders. The hall became a hub of economic activity, hosting trade fairs and public meetings, which reinforced the guild's role in the local economy. Moreover, the standardization of guild architecture can also be seen in the construction techniques employed across different regions. In Italy, for instance, guilds often used a combination of brick and terracotta tiles, influenced by the Roman architectural legacy. The Venetian Glassmakers Guild, established in the 13th century, built their workshop using a mixture of brick and locally sourced marble, showcasing their unique materials while adhering to the principles of guild architecture. In terms of measurements and specifications, many guild halls shared similar dimensions, typically ranging from 60 to 100 feet in length and 30 to 50 feet in width. The height often reached 25 feet, allowing for a spacious and airy environment. This uniformity not only facilitated construction but also created a recognizable architectural identity for guilds across Europe. The processes involved in the construction of these buildings often required extensive collaboration among guild members. From the quarrying of stone to the milling of timber, each phase of construction was typically overseen by the guild's master craftsmen. For instance, In the construction of the Guild Hall of the Carpenters in Paris in 1355, the guild organized communal workdays where members contributed their skills in carpentry, masonry, and painting. This collaborative approach not only expedited the building process but also fostered a sense of community and pride among the members. In conclusion, the architectural landscape of medieval guilds, characterized by standardized construction methods and materials, reveals much about the values and aspirations of these organizations. The evolution from timber to stone, the adherence to specific regulations, and the collaborative nature of construction all reflect the guild's desire to establish a lasting presence within their communities. As we delve deeper into the architectural history of guilds, it becomes evident that these structures were not merely functional, they were also symbols of power, identity, and craftsmanship in the medieval world. The construction methods utilized in the establishment of guild halls and related structures during the medieval period reflect a meticulous adherence to local architectural styles and available materials, which were determined by geographical location and socio-political conditions. The majority of guild halls were constructed using timber frames, a method prevalent from the 12th to the 15th century. In areas with abundant forests, such as the Ardennes and the Black Forest regions, timber was readily available. The dimensions of timber beams typically ranged from 4 to 12 inches in width and 6 to 20 feet in length, depending on the structural requirements and the height of the building. In contrast, in regions where stone was more accessible, such as the Cotswolds in England, guilds opted for stone construction, particularly limestone and sandstone. The quarrying of these materials was labor-intensive and often required the guild to enter into contracts with local stonemasons. Construction of a stone guild hall often involved a foundation of at least 3 feet deep to ensure stability, with walls that could reach upwards of 15 feet in height, exemplifying the grandeur of the guild's ambitions. The roofs of these structures were frequently thatched or covered with wooden shingles, materials chosen for their availability and cost-effectiveness. The pitch of the roof typically ranged from 30 to 45 degrees, facilitating effective rainwater drainage and minimizing the risk of structural damage. The guilds would often adhere to a standard size for roofing materials, typically around 2 feet by 4 feet for shingles, to ensure uniformity and ease of replacement during maintenance. Maintenance procedures for guild structures were largely dictated by the seasonal changes and the wear and tear associated with the local climate. Regular inspections, documented in maintenance logs, were conducted quarterly, with specific attention paid to the integrity of the roof and the condition of the walls. For instance, in 1325, the Guild of Stonemasons in York established a routine inspection schedule that resulted in the replacement of approximately 300 shingles annually, which were noted to degrade more rapidly during the wet winter months. The cost of maintenance varied significantly. In 1342, the Guild allocated 10 shillings for repairs, while in more prosperous years, such as 1370, this figure could rise to 50 shillings. Financial records of guilds present a wealth of detail that illustrates the economic landscape of medieval guilds. The accounting practices of guilds were often rudimentary, relying on ledgers that recorded income from membership dues, which generally ranged from 1 to 5 pence per member per quarter. A detailed account from the Butchers' Guild of London in 1385 notes an annual income of 200 shillings derived from these dues, alongside a separate line item for fines imposed on members for non-compliance with guild regulations, which contributed an additional. In contrast, guilds located in regions with fewer forests, such as parts of Italy, often relied on stone as their primary construction material. The Stonemasons' Guild in Florence, founded around 1200, exemplified this trend. Their guild hall, constructed from local limestone, showcased the advancements in masonry techniques of the time, such as the use of voussoirs in arches and intricate stone carvings. The stone construction not only provided durability but also reflected the wealth and status of the guild, as stone buildings often signified permanence and stability. By the mid-13th century, around 1250, the introduction of brick as a building material significantly changed the landscape of guild construction. Regions such as the Low Countries, where clay was abundant, saw a rise in brick construction. The Bakers' Guild in Bruges built its hall using red bricks, which were not only cost-effective but also offered better fire resistance compared to timber. The use of brick allowed for more intricate designs, including decorative patterns and motifs that distinguished guild halls from one another. The layout of guild halls was also influenced by their function. Many guilds incorporated workshops within their halls, allowing artisans to work on their craft while also engaging in the administrative and social activities of the guild. For example, the Blacksmiths' Guild in Nuremberg, which gained prominence in the late 13th century, integrated forge spaces into their guild hall, enabling blacksmiths to demonstrate their skills during guild meetings and public exhibitions. This dual-purpose design was not only practical but also reinforced the guild's role in promoting their trades to the wider community. The construction processes varied significantly depending on the materials used. For timber-framed buildings, the process began with selecting and felling trees, which was often done in the winter months when the sap was down, making the wood less prone to warping. Once the timber was cut, it was seasoned for several months to reduce moisture content. Craftsmen used traditional joinery techniques, such as mortise and tenon joints, which were secured without the use of nails, ensuring the structural integrity of the building. In contrast, the process of brick construction involved several steps. Clay was excavated, then mixed with water and sometimes straw to create a malleable substance. This mixture was formed into bricks and left to dry in the sun before being fired in a kiln. The firing process, which reached temperatures of over 1000 degrees Celsius, was crucial as it hardened the bricks and made them suitable for building. The Brickmakers' Guild of Antwerp, active in the late 13th century, developed innovative kiln designs that improved the efficiency of brick production, allowing for a higher quality of bricks that were more uniform in size and shape. Moreover, historical context played a vital role in shaping these construction practices. The rise of trade and commerce in the late medieval period brought about a burgeoning middle class, which in turn fueled the formation of guilds. As cities expanded, the demand for guild halls grew, prompting guilds to invest in more elaborate and durable structures. The construction of large-scale cathedrals and public buildings during this period also influenced guild architecture, as craftsmen sought to emulate the grandeur and complexity of these monumental works. One notable case study is the Guildhall of the Fishmongers in London, constructed in the late 14th century. This hall, built using a combination of timber and stone, featured a grand facade with intricate carvings representing various fish species, highlighting the guild's trade. The building served not only as a meeting place but also as a venue for civic events, reflecting the guild's importance in the social fabric of the city. In summary, the construction methods and materials of medieval guilds were deeply intertwined with the resources available in their regions, the economic conditions of the time, and the specific needs of the trades they represented. From timber-framed halls in forested areas to stone structures in urban centers and the later adoption of brick, these buildings not only served practical purposes but also acted as symbols of the guild's status and influence in medieval society. As such, the evolution of guild construction reflects broader trends in medieval architecture and the socio-economic developments of the period. The construction methods and materials employed in the establishment of medieval guild halls were characterized by a reliance on locally sourced materials and traditional craftsmanship. The primary materials used included timber, stone, and, in some cases, brick. The choice of materials often depended on regional availability and the economic status of the guild itself. For instance, the Guild of Stonemasons in York, established in 1393, predominantly utilized local sandstone due to its abundance in the Yorkshire region. The Guild Hall, constructed in 1402, featured walls made of roughly hewn sandstone blocks measuring approximately 30 centimeters by 60 centimeters, with a roof structure supported by oak trusses. In contrast, the Guild of Weavers in Ghent, founded in 1251, opted for timber frame construction, employing oak beams that measured 15 centimeters by 30 centimeters for the structural framework. The walls were filled with wattle and daub, a method that involved weaving branches between wooden stakes and applying a mixture of clay and straw for insulation. The Guild Hall was notable for its large windows, which measured 1.5 meters by 2 meters, allowing for ample natural light, a necessity for the intricate work of weaving. Maintenance procedures for guild structures were rigorously outlined in the guild charters and were often overseen by appointed officials within the guild. For example, the Guild of Blacksmiths in Cologne, established in 1346, mandated that every member contribute a specific amount of labor each spring for maintenance tasks. These tasks included repairing roofs, reinforcing walls, and cleaning the interior spaces of the guild hall. In 1382, the guild instituted a rotating schedule whereby every member would take part in maintenance duties at least once every 3 years, ensuring that all members engaged in the upkeep of their communal space. In terms of financial records and costs, the documentation was typically maintained in ledgers by the guild treasurer. These ledgers recorded income from membership dues, which often varied by the trade of the member. For instance, in 1450, the Guild of Bakers in London charged an annual fee of 5 shillings for master bakers and 2 shillings for journeymen. Additionally, income generated from fines for non-compliance with guild regulations was meticulously documented. In 1465, fines amounted to 12 shillings for failure to attend mandatory meetings. The costs associated with construction and maintenance were also carefully tracked. In 1370, records show that the Guild of Carpenters in Paris spent approximately 40 livres on roofing materials alone, sourced from local timber merchants. The Guild's financial records indicated that the overall expenditure for the construction of their hall, completed in 1375, amounted to 200 livres, including labor costs, which were roughly estimated at 60 livres for local craftsmen who were paid daily rates of about 4 deniers. Personnel within the guilds were typically defined by specific job descriptions that outlined the roles and responsibilities of each member. The Guild of Tailors in Florence, established in 1280, categorized its members into 3 distinct ranks: masters, journeymen, and apprentices. Masters were required to employ at least 1 journeyman and 2 apprentices, while journeymen were expected to have completed a minimum of 4 years of training under a master before they could apply for membership. The Guild's regulations, codified in 1345, specified that apprentices must be at least 12 years old and should serve a term of up to 7 years. Technical specifications regarding the guild structure were often detailed in the guild charters. The Guild of Shoemakers in Bruges, founded in 1358, outlined that the minimum dimensions for a shoemaker's workspace within the guild hall must be no less than 3 meters by 4 meters, allowing sufficient space for the crafting of footwear. Additionally, the guild mandated that all members adhere to specific standards concerning the materials used. For instance, the use of cowhide from healthy cattle was strictly enforced to ensure the quality of the finished products. Furthermore, the guilds maintained strict adherence to quality control specifications, which were often documented in the form of inspection reports. The Guild of Potters in Delft, established in 1401, implemented a system of quality checks wherein pots and ceramics were assessed for structural integrity and aesthetic value. These inspections were conducted biannually, with records indicating that in 1423, 15% of the items produced in that year failed to meet the guild standards, leading to a fine of 20 guilders imposed on the offending craftsman. In terms of compliance documentation, each guild had an established set of protocols to ensure that members followed the regulations laid out in their respective charters. The Guild of Goldsmiths in Nuremberg, founded in 1331, required every member to submit an annual report detailing their production output, materials used, and any grievances experienced during the year. These reports were submitted to the Guild Council, which convened quarterly to review compliance and address any issues. The documentation process was so meticulous that in 1455, it was recorded that 98% of members complied with the reporting requirements, a testament to the Guild's commitment to governance. Guild meetings were also a critical aspect of compliance, with each guild mandated to hold regular gatherings. The Guild of Fishermen in Venice, established in 1285, stipulated that meetings be held monthly, where members would discuss regulatory changes, financial matters, and communal fishing practices. Minutes from these meetings were meticulously recorded and preserved, with the minutes from the meeting on April 15, 1392, detailing discussions on new fishing quotas and the introduction of a fine for those who failed to adhere to the established limits. The record-keeping practices of medieval guilds extended to include the documentation of disputes and resolutions. The Guild of Tanners in Lyon, founded in 1400, maintained a dispute resolution committee that addressed grievances among members, such as conflicts over prices or quality of materials. Records indicate that in 1420, the committee resolved 47 disputes, with 32 resulting in fines or sanctions against members who failed to comply with guild standards. In conclusion, the construction methods and maintenance procedures of medieval guild halls, coupled with the meticulous nature of financial records, personnel job descriptions, and technical specifications, reflect a broader commitment to the principles of organization and compliance within guild structures. These guilds not only served as professional associations but also as microcosms of medieval society, exhibiting the importance of communal responsibility and the adherence to established norms. The detailed accounts of their practices provide a comprehensive understanding of the bureaucratic nature of guild membership and the societal framework in which these organizations operated. The monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation continues its exploration into the intricate labyrinth of guild membership and the bureaucratic architecture that sustained it. In this segment, we will delve into regional variations and comparisons, the evolution of application procedures over different historical periods, the complex bureaucratic regulations and laws that govern these processes, the logistics and supply chain considerations that underpin the Guild's operational frameworks, and the record-keeping methods employed to document this ever-expanding web of compliance. Regional variations and comparisons *. The medieval period was not monolithic, it was a tapestry of regional differences that affected guild membership application processes. In England, for instance, the guilds often had a more centralized approach, heavily leaning on royal charters that explicitly defined membership requirements. Applications were typically submitted to a guild master and required verification of one's trade proficiency. The London guilds, especially the worshipful companies, exemplified this with their rigorous standards, which necessitated not only skill but also the payment of hefty entry fees, often accompanied by a detailed portfolio of one's work. In contrast, the Italian city-states, such as Florence and Venice, presented a markedly different landscape. Here, guilds were often more fluid in terms of membership criteria, with a focus on mercantile interests. The Arte di Calamala, for instance, which represented cloth merchants, had members who would often apply for membership based on their economic status rather than strict trade proficiency. The process included a more informal application, often reliant on personal recommendations from existing members rather than a stringent examination of one's craft. Moreover, in Flanders, the guilds adopted a hybrid approach. The guild system was intertwined with the burgeoning craft markets, leading to application procedures that were influenced by both the demand for skilled labor and the economic fluctuations of the textile industry. Here, a candidate's association with a master craftsman could significantly influence their chances of acceptance, leading to a system that was as much about networking as it was about skill. These regional variations were not merely bureaucratic curiosities, they reflected the economic realities and social structures unique to each area. The comparative analysis of application procedures across these regions reveals not only the diversity of the guild system but also how local economies shaped the bureaucratic processes that governed them. Evolution over different time periods *. As we transition from the early Middle Ages through the High Middle Ages and into the Late Middle Ages, it becomes evident that the guild membership application processes evolved significantly. During the early Middle Ages, the concept of guilds was still in its infancy. Membership was often informal and based largely on familial ties or local community recognition. The application process, if one could term it as such, was little more than a verbal agreement between the master craftsman and the apprentice, often lacking any formal documentation. By the High Middle Ages, around the 12th to 14th centuries, the situation became markedly more complex. The rise of urban centers and increased trade led to an expanding need for regulation and standardization. Guilds began to establish formal charters that dictated the membership application process. The introduction of written applications became common, often requiring an applicant to provide a comprehensive account of their previous work experience, along with references from existing guild members. This shift towards written documentation was indicative of a broader trend towards bureaucratization that characterized this period. By the late Middle Ages, the guild membership application process had matured into an intricate system of checks and balances. The advent of codified laws and regulations, most notably the statutes of the guilds, required prospective members to undergo a series of evaluations. These evaluations included apprenticeship verification, skill demonstrations, and compliance with guild-specific regulations. The application forms became more elaborate, often requiring not just personal data but also detailed accounts of one's lineage, financial status, and even moral character. This period also saw the rise of guild registries, where each applicant's details were meticulously recorded, marking a significant evolution in record-keeping practices. Bureaucratic regulations and laws *. The bureaucratic landscape of medieval guilds was heavily influenced by a myriad of regulations and laws, both local and overarching. The legal framework governing guilds often stemmed from royal decrees, municipal regulations, and even church doctrines, creating a complex legal tapestry that applicants had to navigate. For instance, in England, the Statute of Artificers, 1563, formalized many of the existing practices, mandating that all craftsmen must be registered with their respective guilds. This law not only dictated the membership criteria but also imposed a series of regulations on wages, apprenticeships, and working conditions. The statute emphasized the necessity for guilds to maintain a strict oversight of their members, ensuring compliance with the established norms of trade. In contrast, the Hanseatic League, a commercial and defensive confederation of merchant guilds in Northern Europe, operated under a different set of regulations. Here, the guilds were bound by collective agreements that facilitated trade among member cities. The rules governing membership often included stipulations regarding the payment of dues, adherence to trade practices, and penalties for non-compliance, which ranged from fines to expulsion from the guild. The League's emphasis on collective bargaining created a unique regulatory environment that shaped the application process for membership. Furthermore, the influence of the Church cannot be underestimated. Ecclesiastical authorities often imposed moral and ethical standards that guilds were expected to uphold. This included regulations on conduct, fair trading practices, and even the moral character of applicants. Guilds were often required to conduct their operations in a manner that aligned with Christian values, leading to additional layers of scrutiny in the application process. Supply chain and logistics asterisk. The operational mechanics of guilds were deeply intertwined with supply chain and logistics considerations, which, while often overlooked, played a critical role in the membership application process. The nature of a guild's trade dictated the kinds of materials and resources members would require, which in turn influenced the criteria for membership. For instance, in the textile guilds, applicants were often required to demonstrate not only their skill in weaving or dyeing but also their understanding of the supply chain involved in procuring raw materials. An application could involve providing evidence of reliable suppliers of wool, dye, and other essential materials. The guilds maintained extensive networks of suppliers and were heavily reliant on these relationships to ensure quality and consistency in production. Therefore, a prospective member's ability to navigate this supply chain was often a critical component of their application. Similarly, in the metalworking guilds, the procurement of raw metals and the management of tools and equipment were paramount. Applicants might be asked to present a detailed plan outlining how they would source their materials and manage their production processes. This level of detail ensured that only those with a comprehensive understanding of both the craft and the logistics required to support it could gain entry into the guild. Moreover, guilds frequently established partnerships with local suppliers, creating a system of mutual support that extended beyond mere membership. These relationships could influence the approval of applications, as existing members often preferred candidates who demonstrated an understanding of the guild's logistical framework. In this sense, the application process not only assessed skill but also the applicant's ability to integrate into an existing economic network. Record-keeping methods asterisk. As guilds evolved, so too did their methods of record-keeping, which became increasingly sophisticated over time. In the early Middle Ages, guild records were often informal, consisting primarily of oral traditions and rudimentary written notes that were kept by the guild masters. However, as the complexity of the application processes increased, so did the necessity for more formalized record-keeping methods. By the High Middle Ages, guilds began to adopt more structured record-keeping practices. The introduction of ledger books became commonplace, allowing for the meticulous documentation of membership applications, fees paid, and compliance with guild regulations. These ledgers were often maintained by a designated clerk, who was tasked with ensuring accuracy and completeness. The clerk's role was crucial. They would often be responsible for cross-referencing applications with existing membership records, verifying information provided by applicants, and ensuring compliance with the guild statutes. The late Middle Ages saw the advent of more advanced documentation practices, influenced by the rise of literacy and the availability of paper. Guilds began to utilize standardized forms for applications, which included sections for personal information, trade details, and references. These forms were often designed to facilitate the clerical work involved in processing applications, allowing for greater efficiency and accuracy in record keeping. Moreover, the integration of seals and signatures became a standard practice to authenticate documents. This not only provided a layer of security for the guilds but also signified the importance of legitimacy in the application process. The guild seal became a symbol of authority, often used to endorse various documents, including membership applications, contracts, and compliance records. In conclusion, the intricacies of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation reveal a complex interplay of regional variations, evolving practices over time, bureaucratic regulations, logistical considerations, and meticulous record-keeping methods. As we continue to chronicle this dreary history, it becomes increasingly evident that beneath the surface of these mundane details lies a rich tapestry of social, economic, and political dynamics that define the medieval landscape. The guild system, while often perceived as a straightforward framework for trade, was, in fact, a labyrinthine structure that demanded a high degree of compliance and documentation from its members, reflecting the broader societal values and challenges of the time. The monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation is indeed a vast and intricate tapestry, woven from the threads of regional variations, bureaucratic regulations, and the evolution of administrative practices over centuries. In this segment, we shall delve into the minutiae of these topics, examining how they influenced the very fabric of guild life and the overarching structure of medieval economies. #### Regional variations and comparisons. In the sprawling landscape of medieval Europe, the processes surrounding guild membership and the requisite documentation were far from uniform. The variations were often pronounced, dictated by local customs, economic conditions, and the socio-political climate of the area. For instance, in Flanders, a region renowned for its textile production, guilds such as the Weavers' Guild exhibited a more rigid application process compared to their counterparts in rural England. The Flemish guilds mandated a series of rigorous examinations and a demonstrable mastery of weaving techniques, often requiring aspirants to produce a fully realized piece of work before they could even be considered for membership. This practice not only ensured quality but also served to significantly prolong the admission process. Conversely, in the English countryside, guilds tended to be more lenient. The local blacksmith's guild in a small market town might accept members based on familial ties or local reputation rather than strict technical proficiency. This led to a more informal application process, characterized by a mere declaration of intent and a small fee payable to the guild treasury, which was often recorded in a ledger by the guild cleric. Such regional discrepancies underscore the localized nature of guilds and the corresponding variance in how compliance documentation was generated and maintained. #### Evolution over different time periods. As we traverse the timeline from the early medieval period through to the late Middle Ages, the evolution of guild membership procedures becomes evident. Initially, during the 11th and 12th centuries, guilds were relatively nascent institutions, characterized by loosely defined entry requirements and minimal bureaucratic oversight. Aspiring members often relied on the goodwill of existing members, and documentation was often sparse. A simple note scrawled on a piece of parchment might suffice to indicate a new member's acceptance. However, by the 14th century, with the proliferation of trade and the burgeoning complexity of urban economies, that guilds began to formalize their structures. The growing influence of the craft guilds, in particular, necessitated the implementation of more detailed application procedures. The introduction of written charters, which outlined specific requirements for membership, became commonplace. These charters delineated everything from the educational prerequisites for apprenticeships to the ethical conduct expected of guild members. Moreover, the late Middle Ages saw the rise of municipal regulations, compelling guilds to adhere to standardized documentation practices. The establishment of city councils often mandated the submission of detailed records concerning membership roles and compliance with guild regulations. This shift heralded a new era in guild administration, where meticulous record-keeping became not only a necessity but a hallmark of a well-functioning guild. ### bureaucratic regulations and laws. The bureaucratic landscape in which guilds operated was shaped significantly by a myriad of regulations and laws, both local and imperial. The 13th century witnessed the introduction of various statutes aimed at curbing monopolistic practices and ensuring fair competition among guilds. These laws often required guilds to maintain comprehensive records of their members, including application dates, trade specialties, and compliance with the guild's ethical standards. For instance, the Statute of Artificers passed in England in 1563 mandated that all craftsmen must be part of a guild and must register their trade with local authorities. This statute not only laid the groundwork for a more formalized structure of trade but also stipulated that guilds must keep meticulous records of all members, including a detailed account of each member's training and apprenticeship history. The clerks tasked with these records often faced the daunting challenge of maintaining accuracy amidst the chaos of bustling guild meetings and the frequent turnover of membership. The enforcement of these regulations often fell to guild officers, who were entrusted with the responsibility of conducting regular audits and compliance checks. Guilds that failed to adhere to these regulations faced penalties, which could range from fines to the revocation of their charter. This regulatory environment fostered an atmosphere of vigilance, where clerks and guild leaders had to ensure that every piece of documentation was in order, lest they invite scrutiny from municipal authorities. ### supply chain and logistics. The logistics of guild membership encompassed not only the application process but also the broader supply chain that guilds relied upon. The interdependencies between guilds and their suppliers were critical, as many guilds depended on specific materials and resources to fulfill their respective trades. For instance, the Guild of Bakers in a medieval city would require consistent access to flour, yeast, and other baking essentials. The procurement of these materials was often a matter of great importance, necessitating strict adherence to supply chain protocols. Guilds often established relationships with local farmers and merchants to secure the best prices and ensure the quality of their raw materials. These partnerships were often formalized through contracts, which further complicated the bureaucratic landscape. Documentation related to these contracts would also need to be meticulously maintained, as any discrepancies could lead to disputes that might involve the guild in protracted legal battles. Moreover, as trade routes expanded and the market for goods became more competitive, guilds found themselves needing to adapt their logistics strategies. The introduction of new materials and technologies required guilds to continuously update their supply chain practices. For example, the introduction of new metal alloys in the blacksmithing industry necessitated that guild members be trained in the use of these materials, which in turn required updated documentation regarding materials used in production. Record-keeping methods. The methods by which guilds maintained their records further highlight the bureaucratic intricacies of medieval guild life. The clerical responsibilities often fell to a designated guild member, usually referred to as the scribe or clerk, who was charged with the daunting task of documenting every aspect of guild operations. The tools of the trade included quills, ink, and parchment, with the quality of materials varying significantly based on the guild's financial resources. Wealthier guilds could afford finer parchment, while less affluent ones resorted to coarser, cheaper materials. Record-keeping practices evolved over time, transitioning from rudimentary lists to more sophisticated ledgers that categorized members by their trade and recorded their compliance with guild regulations. The meticulousness of these records varied widely. Some guilds maintained detailed logs of meetings, decisions made, and the rationale behind them, while others merely noted the names of new members and their trade specialties. The introduction of the double-entry bookkeeping system in the late Middle Ages revolutionized how guilds managed their finances and documented their operations. This method allowed for a more systematic approach to record-keeping, enabling guilds to track income from membership fees, fines, and other revenue streams while simultaneously documenting expenditures related to supply purchases and administrative costs. The clerk's ability to maintain accurate financial records became a crucial aspect of guild management, as financial stability was essential for the continued operation and influence of the guild. In conclusion, the history of guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation reveals a complex web of regional variations, evolving bureaucratic regulations, and meticulous record-keeping practices. These elements, while seemingly mundane, were integral to the functioning of guilds and their role in shaping medieval economies. The interplay between local customs and overarching laws created a rich tapestry of guild life, underpinned by the diligent efforts of clerks and guild members who navigated the intricate landscape of medieval trade. As we continue to explore this tedious yet fascinating history, we uncover the often overlooked details that played a pivotal role in the development of guilds and their enduring legacy in the annals of economic history. The monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. Part 8: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The diverse tapestry of medieval Europe engendered a multitude of regional variations in guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. The distinct socio-economic contexts, local customs, and regulatory frameworks gave rise to unique practices that reflected each region's specific needs and priorities. For instance, in the bustling urban centers of Flanders, such as Bruges and Ghent, guild membership applications were often characterized by a more elaborate and formalized process, a reflection of the thriving textile trade that necessitated stringent quality controls. Applicants were frequently required to submit detailed descriptions of their intended trade, alongside attestations from existing guild members vouching for their skills and integrity. In contrast, The agrarian societies of Eastern Europe, such as those in parts of Poland and Hungary, exhibited a more rudimentary approach to guild membership. Here, the documentation often consisted merely of a simple declaration of intent, accompanied by the requisite payment of a nominal fee. This disparity highlights not only the economic conditions of the respective regions but also the varying degrees of bureaucratic sophistication present in urban versus rural locales. The guilds in the East, often less formalized, relied heavily on communal bonds and personal relationships rather than extensive documentation, which in turn influenced their compliance procedures. Moreover, in the Iberian Peninsula, guilds faced additional layers of complexity due to the influences of both Christian and Islamic traditions. The coexistence of different cultural practices necessitated a more nuanced approach to guild membership applications. In cities like Toledo, applicants were sometimes required to furnish proof of their religious affiliation, thereby intertwining guild membership with broader societal norms and expectations. Such regional variations underscore the necessity for scholars to approach the study of medieval guilds with a keen awareness of local contexts. Part 9: Evolution over different time periods. The evolution of guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation from the early medieval period to the late Middle Ages illustrates a trend towards increasing bureaucratic complexity and formalization. In the early centuries, guilds functioned more as informal associations of craftsmen and merchants, with little more than oral agreements and rudimentary records to govern their activities. Membership was often granted based on familial ties, personal recommendations, or the completion of an apprenticeship, often with little to no written documentation involved. As the medieval period progressed, particularly from the 12th century onwards, the increasing importance of trade and commerce catalyzed a shift towards more structured application processes. The burgeoning economic landscape necessitated the creation of comprehensive compliance documentation to safeguard against fraud and ensure quality standards. By the 13th century, it became common practice for guilds to require prospective members to submit detailed application forms, which included personal information, trade qualifications, and endorsements from current members. The late Middle Ages witnessed an acceleration in the bureaucratic nature of guild membership applications, particularly following the establishment of municipal governments that sought to regulate trade more stringently. Compliance documentation evolved to include not only applications but also ongoing reporting requirements, as guilds were increasingly seen as extensions of municipal authority. The introduction of standardized forms and procedures, often mandated by local governments, marked a significant departure from the more informal practices of earlier centuries and reflected the growing intertwining of guilds with civic governance. Part 10: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. The body of bureaucratic regulations and laws governing guild membership application procedures is vast, often varying significantly from one locale to another. In many cases, these regulations were codified in municipal charters, which outlined the responsibilities and rights of guilds in relation to local authorities. For instance, the Statute of the Guild of Weavers in London, established in 1390, delineated specific criteria for membership, including a requisite number of years spent in apprenticeship and the necessity of passing an examination to demonstrate proficiency in weaving techniques. Such regulations not only served to elevate the standards of craftsmanship but also reflected the guild's vested interest in maintaining a monopoly over their respective trades. Additionally, the enforcement of these regulations often necessitated the creation of compliance documentation that would be regularly reviewed by guild officials. Failure to adhere to these bureaucratic stipulations could result in penalties ranging from fines to expulsion from the guild. This bureaucratic oversight was not merely a matter of internal governance, it frequently intersected with broader legal frameworks, as guilds were often granted certain privileges and protections by local rulers in exchange for compliance with established regulations. One notable example of the bureaucratic nature of guild regulations can be found in the medieval city of Nuremberg, where the guilds were subject to the oversight of municipal officials who enforced compliance through regular inspections. The Guild of Bakers, for instance, was mandated to maintain detailed records of their production and sales, which were subject to scrutiny by appointed inspectors. This not only ensured adherence to quality standards but also played a crucial role in regulating the market, as oversupply could lead to price fluctuations detrimental to both bakers and consumers alike. Part 11: Supply Chain and Logistics. The intricate web of supply chain and logistics involved in the guild membership application process cannot be overstated. The procurement of materials, the distribution of goods, and the management of inventory were all interlinked with the protocols surrounding guild membership. For instance, in regions where raw materials were scarce, guilds often instituted stringent requirements for members to demonstrate their ability to source essential supplies in compliance with guild standards. This necessitated not only a thorough understanding of local markets but also the establishment of relationships with suppliers, which often had to be documented as part of the membership application. The logistics involved in transporting goods to and from guild workshops further complicated the application process. In many instances, prospective members were required to present evidence of their ability to manage supply chains effectively. This could include contracts with carriers, invoices for raw materials, and proof of previous sales or transactions. Guilds often maintain detailed records of these logistics to ensure that members adhered to established trade practices, which were essential for maintaining quality and reputation. Moreover, the role of local marketplaces cannot be overlooked in this context. Many guilds operated in conjunction with specific markets, and membership often required compliance with the regulations governing these venues. Applicants were expected to demonstrate familiarity with market days, pricing strategies, and the intricacies of bartering within the local economy. This emphasis on logistics and supply chains not only reinforced the guild's role within the local economy but also contributed to the formalization of application processes as a means of ensuring that members were adequately prepared for the demands of trade. Part 12: Record-Keeping Methods. The methods of record-keeping employed by medieval guilds in relation to membership applications and compliance documentation were as varied as the guilds themselves. In the early medieval period, record-keeping was often rudimentary, relying heavily on handwritten entries in ledger books that were maintained by guild clerks. These records typically included basic information about members, such as names, trades, and dates of application. However, as the complexity of guild operations increased, so too did the sophistication of record-keeping methods. By the 12th century, the introduction of more formalized accounting practices led to the development of specialized record-keeping techniques. Many guilds began to adopt the practice of maintaining separate ledgers for different aspects of their operations, including membership applications, financial transactions, and compliance reporting. This segmentation allowed for greater clarity and accuracy in record keeping, as well as easier access to information for both guild members and municipal authorities. The advent of the printing press in the late 15th century further transformed record-keeping practices within guilds. The ability to produce standardized forms and documentation facilitated a greater degree of uniformity in the application process and compliance documentation. As a result, many guilds began to issue printed application forms, which could be completed by prospective members and submitted for review. This shift not only streamlined the application process but also enhanced the reliability of record-keeping practices, as records could be reproduced and distributed more efficiently. In conclusion, the evolution of record-keeping methods within medieval guilds reflects broader trends in the increasing bureaucratization of trade practices. The meticulous documentation required for membership applications and compliance not only served to uphold the standards of craftsmanship but also reinforced the guild's integral role within the economic and social fabric of medieval society. As scholars continue to examine the nuanced details of these practices, it becomes evident that the history of guild membership applications is not merely a chronicle of bureaucratic procedures, but a window into the complexities of medieval life itself. The monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. Part 9: Regional Variations and Comparisons. The medieval guild system, a hodgepodge of local customs and regulations, exhibited significant regional variations that might seem trivial at first glance but were deeply entrenched in the social, economic, and political fabric of each locality. For instance, in the bustling trade hubs of Flanders, guilds were known for their elaborate structures and strict adherence to membership protocols, whereas the guilds in the more agrarian regions of England reflected a simpler, more communal approach to trade and craftsmanship. In Flanders, particularly in cities such as Bruges and Ghent, the guilds operated within a well-defined framework of regulations known as the Ordonnances de Métiers. These ordinances dictated every aspect of guild membership applications, from the initial submission of a petition to the final approval by the guild's council. An applicant in Flanders was often required to present not only proof of skill but also a detailed account of his or her lineage, an aspect that underscored the region's emphasis on family heritage and social standing in assessing worthiness for guild membership. Conversely, in England, guilds were often less formalized. The application process was frequently characterized by a communal gathering where prospective members would be assessed based on their craft and character in a more informal setting. The emphasis here was less on documentation and more on personal recommendation from existing members, a practice that fostered a sense of camaraderie but could lead to nepotism and exclusion of deserving applicants. The Guild of St. Aloy in London, for instance, was known for its less rigid application procedures, allowing for a more inclusive membership based largely on one's ability to pay the requisite fees and demonstrate rudimentary skills in metalworking. Part 10: Evolution over different time periods. The guild membership application process did not remain static throughout the medieval era, rather, it evolved in response to broader societal transformations, including shifts in economic practices and political structures. During the early medieval period, guilds were primarily localized and focused on artisanal craftsmanship. Membership applications were often informal, relying heavily on personal relationships and local customs. As trade expanded in the late medieval period, particularly with the growth of the merchant class and increased interregional commerce, guilds adapted their procedures to reflect these changes. The burgeoning economy demanded a more systematic approach to membership applications. By the 14th century, many guilds had adopted written applications and formalized documentation to create a record of their members. This period saw the introduction of standardized forms that required applicants to list their qualifications, provide references, and, in some cases, submit to an examination. The late medieval period also witnessed the emergence of regulatory bodies that oversaw guild operations. In cities like Venice, the establishment of the Consiglio dei Dieci necessitated stricter compliance documentation for guilds, ensuring that all members adhered to the city's broader economic and social goals. Such bureaucratic developments laid the groundwork for the complex regulations governing guild membership that would emerge in the Renaissance and beyond. Part 11: Bureaucratic Regulations and Laws. As guilds became more entrenched in the medieval economy, a plethora of bureaucratic regulations began to govern the application and compliance processes. The legal framework surrounding guilds varied widely across regions and often reflected the political climate of the time. In many instances, local lords or city councils enacted laws that necessitated detailed compliance documentation, ostensibly to regulate trade practices but often to exert control over the burgeoning merchant and artisan classes. In England, the Statute of Artificers of 1563 stands as a significant regulatory milestone. This law required all artisans to register with their local guilds, detailing their skills, apprenticeships, and any other relevant qualifications. The requirement for comprehensive records created an extensive system of compliance documentation that guilds were obliged to maintain. This statute exemplified the increasing intertwining of government oversight and guild operations, as it mandated that, moreover, the guilds established networks of trusted suppliers and distributors, creating a tightly controlled ecosystem that ensured the efficient movement of goods. The logistics of trade were further complicated by geographical factors, such as the availability of transport routes and local infrastructure. Guilds frequently collaborated with local authorities to improve road conditions or negotiate trade agreements with neighboring regions, thereby enhancing their supply chain capabilities. Record-keeping methods. The methods of record-keeping employed by medieval guilds were as diverse as the guilds themselves, reflecting the intricacies of their application procedures and compliance documentation. In the initial stages of the guild system, record-keeping was often rudimentary, with information recorded in ledgers or on scraps of parchment. This informal approach, while functional, posed challenges in terms of accuracy and accessibility. As guilds evolved and bureaucratic requirements increased, so too did the sophistication of record-keeping methods. By the late medieval period, many guilds had adopted more structured systems of documentation. The use of bound ledgers became commonplace, with entries organized chronologically to facilitate easy retrieval. These ledgers typically contain detailed records of membership applications, including dates of submission, names of applicants, and the outcomes of their applications. In addition to ledgers, some guilds employed the use of specialized forms for various aspects of their operations. For instance, application forms might include sections for personal information, trade history, compliance documentation, and sponsorship details. The standardization of these forms not only streamlined the application process but also facilitated the consistent archiving of information. Record keeping was further enhanced through the use of seals and signatures. Many guilds required that applications bear the signatures of existing members, along with the guild's official seal, to attest to the authenticity of the application. This practice not only served as a security measure but also reinforced the communal aspect of guild membership, as it required the endorsement of one's peers. The advent of the printing press in the late 15th century further revolutionized record-keeping within guilds. Although the impact of this technological advancement was initially limited, it gradually allowed for the mass production of standardized forms and documents, reducing reliance on handwritten records. This shift marked a pivotal moment in the evolution of guild record-keeping and compliance documentation, setting the stage for more modern bureaucratic practices. #Conclusion. In summation, the intricate history of guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation during the medieval period reveals a rich tapestry of regional variations, evolving practices, and bureaucratic complexities. From the informal agreements of early guilds to the rigorous documentation requirements of later periods, the process reflects broader economic and social transformations. The interplay of supply chain logistics and record-keeping methods further underscores the multifaceted nature of guild operations. As we delve deeper into the minutiae of this history, we uncover not only the mechanisms of trade regulation but also the profound impact of guilds on the economic landscape of medieval society. The monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. The medieval period, often characterized by its feudal system, extensive religious influence, and burgeoning trade, was a time when guilds became pivotal in shaping urban economies and social structures. Among the less enthralling aspects of guilds are the intricate and often tedious procedures involved in membership applications and the requisite compliance documentation. This narrative seeks to delve deeper into this labyrinthine process, focusing on various minor historical figures, case studies, comparative analyses with other regions, archaeological findings, and invented quotations from primary sources that, while fictional, aim to capture the dreariness of the guild experience. #Minor historical figures and their roles. In any exploration of guilds, the roles played by minor historical figures can often be overlooked. However, their contributions to the fabric of guild membership processes are pivotal, albeit dull in nature. One such figure is Reginald of Guildford, a lesser-known scribe from the 13th century who meticulously documented the ins and outs of guild applications. Reginald's role primarily involved the recording of applications, the verification of compliance with Guild statutes, and the archiving of the decisions made by the Guild Council. Consider the case of Beatrix de Lacy, a silk weaver from the late 14th century, who sought admission into the Guild of St. John the Baptist in London. Reginald's records indicate that her application was filled with the requisite details, such as her lineage, previous apprenticeships, and references from established guild members. However, the monotony of Reginald's work is highlighted in his notes. On the first day of March, 1392, Beatrix de Lacy presented herself. Her documentation was intact, yet the council deliberated for 3 hours, discussing the merits of her proposed membership without arriving at a conclusion. This snippet exemplifies the tedious nature of decision-making within guilds, where even the most straightforward applications could result in drawn-out discussions. ### specific case studies with dates. To further illuminate the dreariness of guild application processes, one can examine specific case studies from various European cities, documenting the dates and outcomes of notable applications. ### Case Study 1, The Guild of Bakers in Paris, 1345. In the year 1345, a baker named Pierre Lopain submitted an application to join the Guild of Bakers in Paris. His application included a detailed account of his bread-making experience, including a log of the types of bread he had produced over the years. The Guild's compliance documentation required not only a list of baked goods but also the exact weights of bread loaves, as established by previous Guild regulations. The records indicate that Pierre's application was initially rejected due to a minor discrepancy in his weights. The Guild's minute book states, on the 15th of April, the council met to discuss the weights of loaves presented by Pierre Lopain. It was determined that his loaves fell short of the prescribed weight by exactly 3 ounces. After Pierre resubmitted his application with corrected weights, the council took another 2 weeks to reach a consensus, highlighting the slow nature of guild bureaucracy. ### Case Study 2, The Guild of Blacksmiths in Nuremberg, 1382. Another illustrative case can be found in Nuremberg, where a blacksmith named Hans von Eisen sought entry into the Guild of Blacksmiths in 1382. His application included a compliance document that required letters of recommendation. 2. It is incumbent upon all members to submit an annual accounting of their work, detailing the materials used, lest they incur the wrath of the Guild and risk expulsion. From a compliance notice issued by the Guild of Tailors, 1352. 3. The Council convenes on the first Tuesday of each month to deliberate on applications and compliance reports. Thus, all members are urged to attend and present their case. Notice posted in the Guild Hall of the Blacksmiths, 1380. 4. We, the undersigned members of the Guild of St. Eloi, do solemnly swear to uphold the standards of our craft and to report any deviation from the prescribed practices to the Guild Council. Membership Oath, 1300. ###Conclusion. In closing, the history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation is a complex tapestry woven from the actions of both prominent and minor historical figures, specific case studies, regional variations, archaeological findings, and the words of those who participated in this system. While the subject may appear tedious, the intricacies of the guild system reveal much about the social, economic, and cultural fabric of medieval society. Through these layers of detail, we are granted a glimpse into the past, a past that, while monotonous in its bureaucratic nature, was essential to the establishment and maintenance of skilled trades and community standards across the medieval landscape. Each guild, with its unique procedures and compliance documentation, contributed to a larger narrative of craftsmanship, quality control, and the evolving nature of trade during a pivotal era in history. Thus, we find ourselves reflecting on how these ancient practices inform our modern systems of trade and professional standards, even as the details lull us into a state of serene contemplation, encouraging a restful slumber as we ponder the minutiae of guild life. And so, dear listeners, we come to the end of our tranquil journey through the monotonous history of medieval guild membership application procedures and compliance documentation. We've meandered through the winding paths of history, exploring the intricate layers of rules and regulations that shaped the lives of artisans and tradespeople during the Middle Ages. Each requirement, from detailed applications to meticulous record-keeping, reflects not just a method of governance, but a tapestry of community and craftsmanship, woven together by the shared pursuit of excellence. As we reflect upon this journey, it's essential to remember the dedication and discipline that these early guild members exhibited, navigating through their mundane yet vital tasks. Their commitment to their crafts and to one another reminds us that even the most seemingly tedious procedures can hold significance and purpose. In the echoes of their dedication, we find a sense of peace and reassurance in our own lives, recognizing that every effort we make, no matter how small, contributes to the greater whole. Thank you for joining me on this soothing exploration of a topic that, while perhaps not the most exhilarating, offers a unique glimpse into the past. I hope the gentle cadence of our discussion has lulled your mind into a state of calm, allowing you to drift into a serene place of rest. Should you wish to revisit any part of our journey, remember that you can replay this episode whenever you need a comforting companion to guide you to sleep. As the stars twinkle softly in the night sky and the world around you quiets down, I wish you sweet dreams and peaceful slumber. Let the soothing rhythm of your breath guide you into a tranquil sleep, where the stresses of the day dissolve, and all that remains is a gentle embrace of rest. May your dreams be filled with creativity, inspiration, and all the warmth that your heart can hold. Good night, dear listeners. May the peacefulness of this moment carry you into a world of dreams, where the stories of the past blend seamlessly with the hopes of tomorrow. Sleep well, and awaken refreshed, ready to embrace a new day. Until we meet again, may tranquility be your guiding light in the night.